All right, this one's gonna be a doozy. It might be 2 episodes for all I know. I don't know. It's gonna be a good time. I think we may have gotten in over our heads. However, that's like a defining theme in this whole story of the Vietnam War. Also, I'm out of breath because I just walked up my stairs. So, oh my god. I stopped earlier on the last one because I was like, I'm gonna talk about the Japanese next episode because it'll make the narrative work better. And yeah, I think I kind of screwed myself there, but we'll get into it. We're gonna talk about Ho Chi Minh first. You guys know Uncle Ho? Yeah, yeah. You guys don't know Uncle Ho, or maybe you do know Uncle Ho. Do you know that? I don't know. Much like shit, we haven't even gotten to know Din Diem yet. Ugh, fuck. I don't know. This is tough. This is tough, and I'm out of breath. Fuck. But yeah, let's dive into it. Ho Chi Minh. There's not much on his early life. We don't really even know when he was born. Sometime in between 1890 and 1895. You got to remember this is like the forests of North Vietnam. Not really though. His father was a imperial magistrate, but then after beating a guy half to death. Well, no, that's unfair to say. He didn't beat him to death. He beat him almost to death because he didn't die until several days later. But yeah, he got demoted for that. I find that reasonable. I guess I think it's reasonable to demote a guy. It's much better than what we do with like cops. He didn't get a paid vacation, so that's good. But yeah, his father became after he got demoted, he became eligible to work for the French bureaucracy, but he didn't want to because he was like, the French are bad. So here we're already setting the really the stage for the Vietnamese George Washington, the guy who ran North Vietnam, essentially the face of the whole deal. Brutal violence and revolutionary behavior. I'm a big fan. When he was somewhere around uh, 20 years old, I would say. We don't know just because we don't know his actual birthday. But yeah, when he was around 20 years old, he bailed. He got the heck out of you know Vietnam. He got out of Vietnam pretty quick. That's the thing about that. So, and he worked on ships. He visited a ton of countries. Kind of like a not rapist and murderer Carl Panzram, unrelated to the last name here. Um, but yeah, he was exposed to a ton of different cultures. He saw a bunch of different stuff. He had a ton of different jobs too. Like he was a pastry chef in New York apparently, but nobody can really prove that he was. He was like another kind of cook or something like that. Um, in Britain, it's not really important. Just know that he was like, you know, going abroad, having a good time, hanging out. Now, one thing I did forget to mention: Ho Chi Minh is not his real name. His real name is Win Sin Kung, but we're just gonna call him Ho Chi Minh because it's easier. So when he got to France in 1919, he was exposed to the French Socialist Party, where he got his first Marxist-Leninist ideals. Remember that whole revolution that happened 2 years before this? Yeah, now the Civil War, that kind of stuff. But through those times, um, that also kind of brought up when he was in the United States. He saw the racism. Racism is such a stain on American history. Black people built this country. Or they could burn it down if they want to, too. Um, Either way, Ho Chi Minh, he co-founded the French Communist Party in 1920. He was one of the earliest French communists. Um, we don't know. No, I'm just kidding. I was gonna say we don't know if he was like the token Asian, but no, he was actually very capable. He was very, very intelligent, even though he portrays himself as a simple man. After he hung out there for a couple years, wait, I forgot to mention before we get to him formerly, formally, not formerly, God, formally becoming communist dickhead number 8. He actually petitioned Wilson for Vietnamese independence after the First World War during the Treaty of Versailles and like the post-war world shuffle that was going on there. And Wilson was like, sorry, yellow man, we don't like you. Because Wilson really only respected the British. We might do an Anglophile Woodrow Wilson episode later, but we're going to skip over that. Because the Treaty of Versailles, that was meant to be like, all right, the right of free peoples abroad and war bad. And then the Vietnamese were like, oh, does that mean us? And they're like, no, yellow man, you can't do that. Either way, so that kind of triggered Ho Chi Minh. He went to Moscow and studied at the, a communist university of the toilers of the East, which is just such a great socialist name. Just too much. It's like every leftist meme. And it was like literally communist college. Columbia doesn't hold a candle to these guys. They had like 4 dictators go there. It's insane. Like you have the guy from Malaysia who went there. I forget his name. I think Pol Pot was there. The guy who was in charge of China after Mao. Like all these cats all studied here. But unfortunately, it was a victim of communism and it was closed during Stalin's purges. But Ho Chi Minh did develop a deeper understanding of communist theory and practice. But it's like the Marxist-Leninist understanding of communist theory and practice. But that doesn't matter. We don't need to get into difference between Marxist-Leninism and Maoism. It's not important. Speaking of that, though, the Communist Party of China was just like, we're not Marxist anymore. They gutted themselves at the class struggle, so that's pretty epic. But back to it. He got back to it. He went to China, where the communists were getting ready to, start a war there. And he helped out the Chinese communists. He got to help the Mao people. He didn't do the really long walks or any of the shooting. He pretty much just chatted and hung out the whole time. Smoked cigarettes, smoked some Chinese cigarettes. I wish I could have a Chinese cigarette. I just have a Texan beer right now, an American, and some American spirits. But yeah, after that, he helped organize Vietnamese revolutionary groups. Even though he was still in China, he was just like, "Hey guys, go put your lives in danger over there. I'm gonna hang out here." And so that's why he did that. And this is the time that he really developed his political ideology, I guess. Is that redundant? Political ideology? I don't know. I think we're not getting into that bullshit. That's going to be a fucking goddamn. But yeah, so blended nationalism with Marxism, Leninism. He had a bunch of ideas, anti-colonialism, national liberation. We love our ethno-states. He established the Vietnamese Revolutionary Youth League in 1925 in China. And then he founded the Indo-Chinese Communist Party in 1930 in China. Mind you, he didn't get back to Vietnam until 1941. So around he just like hung out like every communist. He just hangs out until he can start causing problems in a nice place. So after the French got their shit rocked by the Germans, the Japanese took over. And not really though. The Japanese didn't really take over. It was the Vichy French regime, but they were like in nominal control, and the Japanese were really the ones taking over. They controlled all the resources. They took a bunch of like ladies and sent them to Japan to be sex ladies. They sent a bunch of Japanese ladies to Vietnam to be sex ladies. Japanese like their sex ladies. Sex ladies or sex slaves, I don't care. which way you do it. I have a lot of phlegm in my throat right now. But yeah, so he founded the Viet Minh in 1941, and the Viet Minh is the League for the Independence of Vietnam. That's going to be Viet Minh are going to be the Vietnamese freedom fighters for the next 2 decades, give or take. This is really when it gets into Ho Chi Minh being a good man versus a great man. And this is where you kind of diverge on the good man and great man theories, because a good man would be like, no, I wouldn't do anything that would put tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of lives at risk. And a great man says, I will if it gets what I think needs to be done. And that was Ho Chi Minh. But yeah, the Japanese were there, kind of under control, keep in charge. But, like, the Chinese were technically in control. They had no real ability to control the colonies, and the Japs contained the ability to have the final say on everything. After France was liberated, though, the Japanese feared that the Vichy regime would side with the Allies in the war against Japan, so, they arrested everyone in the Vichy regime. It's effective, gets the job done. You can't talk that bad on it. They're like, these guys are going to definitely trying to overthrow us and be back in control, and for some reason they thought they could still win the war. It was a very poorly thought out plan. But yeah, so Japanese do that, and then they gave Vietnam sovereignty. This was when it was known as the Empire of Vietnam under Bao Dai. He was the emperor. He was like in charge a little before that too. He was always like nominally in control. He was like a symbolic control. The Japanese are like, you're in control. You're going to listen to everything we say. It was very constricted sovereignty. And yeah, the Japs retained the final word and took all the resources. The Japanese love prostitutes, so, the human rights abuses, the sex slaves, all that stuff. They're not now sex ladies. They are just sex slaves. The war in the Pacific is such a fascinating topic. We're going to just... Come on, man. Dan Carlin. He's got such a good Supernova in the East. I love it. Either way. Okay. So the Japanese did a coup with the Vichy regime. Charles de Gaulle called for the liberation of Vietnam. He's like, we have taken back the French only have taken back Paris and La France, and so we must take it back. Americans, please help us. It doesn't matter. All right, they did not want to free the Vietnamese, and they just wanted to have former management. It's, I'm not gonna say hindsight is 20/20, but like, you would almost think that they saw this coming. I don't know. It's not like doing this and like clamping down right after they just kind of like fought themselves away. It wouldn't cause a massive independence movement that sinks your country financially and causes mass social strife, because that couldn't happen once and definitely won't happen again ever to any other country. But Vichy France's rule over Vietnam, it created an opening for a new Vietnamese independent movement, because it was like a weakened French one. The Vietnamese could like reasonably fight them off, and they got defeated twice. They all knew they were in charge of the Japanese, and then when the Japanese finally just overthrew the Vichy regime and put Bao Dai in charge, the Vietnamese were like, we can fight these guys off, and then they fought them off. So they're like, okay, we actually are kind of like the rightful owners of this, and the French wanting control back was just not helping anybody. But like the overall arching theme of everything I just said was Vichy France's rule, Vichy France's rule over Vietnam created an opening for new Vietnamese independence movement. First off, Ho Chi Minh returned to Vietnam in 1941 because he knew it would be a lot easier to hang out under there. After the French weren't really the French, they were like the German puppet government. Secondly, the Japanese redirected commodities, also encouraging the switch from rice farming to cotton farming, decreasing food supplies and everyday necessities. And, typically mass starvation will do a very, very, very good job of empowering revolutionaries. The Viet Minh created, when Ho Chi Minh got back in 1941, made all of that possible. God, I can't talk. The creation of the puppet government was the beginning of the split between the North and South as well. And after the war, the Viet Minh fought the provisional government of Bao Dai because they all knew these guys just giving it up to the French. Okay, we made it. We made it through Ho Chi Minh. Was that fun, everybody? Did you guys enjoy that? Because I did. I'm spitting all the stuff that I didn't get last episode out. Squeezing it in. Now we're going to get into stuff that you may have not heard about, because everybody forgets this part of the whole Indochina conflict. Hey, Ian, you ever heard of the first Indochina War?
I've heard of the Indochina War. I don't know anything about it.
There you go, people. He's going to know more because he gets to hear me talk about this outside his room all the time. But yeah, so the August Revolution that happened in September, it was when they declared independence from the French in 1945, and Bao Dai became the emperor in 1945, and he was there in 55, but we're just going to keep getting to most of his rule later, because the August Revolution happened up in Hanoi, but the French were still running out of Saigon. The provisional government was planned to be split up by the Chinese nationalists and the British, but on September the 2nd, 1945, Ho Chi Minh, being a revolution out of Hanoi, declared a sovereign Vietnam from the French. And this is where the French woes really began. This is a little scene of what it looked like in Hanoi from a book called Hanoi Adieu, A Bittersweet Memory of a Frenchman in Indochina. I'm going to do my Dan Carlin voice. Red flags emblazoned with the 5-pointed gold star of the Viet Minh were everywhere. Posters and banners adorned buildings, written in several languages, none of them French. Their message was clear. Welcome, allies. Peace is here. Independence for Vietnam. Vietnam for the Vietnamese. Or in other words, France, we hate you more than literally anyone. You suck. Boo! They were not wrong about the French. Little teaser. After their little, so they're gonna lose. They're gonna lose against the Viet Minh in Vietnam, and they're gonna go be like, hey, Algeria, quit getting uppity. Don't get ideas. And then they're gonna kill 25,000 of them, right? And then they're gonna go kill 90,000 Madagascans on kind of the same trip, dog, which is pretty. It's pretty insane. I do hate the French. They are the most wretched race in human history. If the Nazis had stopped with France, I think they would have done some good. Don't hurt those damn Poles. Speaking of Poles, I met my first free-range Pole the other day. There were 3 of them. They were pretty cool. They were very concerned about shot prices and not the open mic that was going on, or the show that I helped produce, but it's okay. Because they were good. I thought they were Italian, which is almost better. But I don't know. It's all better than the French. Because you got to think about it. The only reason their culture is relevant is because you had a monarch spend so much money. People were like, he must know something. And then like the French Revolution should have never happened. I hate it. I'm not a fan of the French Revolution. It was so bad and pointless that immediately after the Reign of Terror, they're like, we're gonna like just have a dictator. They literally just had a dictator for like 20 years after that, or 10, or I don't fucking know. God, I need to learn more about the Napoleonic Wars. I just find like Napoleon so like, other than his spread of ideas, everything else is so inconsequential. It's like, oh my god, he took over Europe. It's like, yeah, he had a new idea that was very popular. It's nothing insane. I guess the only thing good about him is he was like technically Italian, which is so why he's badass. But no, seriously, France has not actually been like a truly relevant country since like 1786. And after that, it's just been fronting to the rest of the world, somehow believing the hot truth. They're like, comme fou pour toi, qui me l'entoure, malin pour tout qui passe. I don't even. I think that kind of came out as fucking Spanish at the end, but I don't give a shit. It's even more insulting to the Frenchmen and wider European languages in a greater sense. I don't consider American English a European language. This is a New World language, baby, like fucking Mexican. It's extremely based. All right, that's that. Yeah, the Viet Minh, they didn't really have the ability for large scale combat, so they just stuck to guerrilla tactics. They didn't, you know, they got a, how should I put it? They weren't quite honest with the Americans when they were fighting the Japanese in 1945, because the OSS, you guys might know them also as the Office of Strategic Services, or precursor to the CIA. They were giving the Viet Minh weapons because they were like, yeah, we hate the Japs too. That's cool. But then they were like, hey, Viet Minh, are you gonna shoot at the French? You know, you're gonna shoot the French after you get the Japanese out and we kick the Japanese ass? And they're like, not gonna deny that we probably will. And the Americans were like, all right, fair enough. I respect you guys. We kind of hate the French too. So, yeah, that's what happened. And then they got a bunch of guns from America. So it's really cool seeing early Viet Minh combat footage with a bunch of American weapons. After they started beating the French more and more and doing more raids, they got more of that. And then the Chinese, they started sending them weapons too. Not so much the Russians quite yet. The Russians won't start doing it until a little bit further down the line. Pardon me. Oh, lordy, where are we? And then, you know, the French gave nominal independence in 1946 to Bao Dai, and they were like, all right, you know, you guys can be independent, but you better listen to us. Kind of what the Japanese were doing, but like somehow more malevolent. I think it was way more malevolent when they did that. But, you know, the communists were still running amok in Hanoi, blowing stuff up. And he was interviewed at some point by Americans, or he was asked by Americans. I don't know if it was interview or asked. I just saw this quote in passing. And I'm paraphrasing, of course, but when asked, Ho Chi Minh was like, about how they could fight an American army, Ho Chi Minh was like, you know, just it's like a tiger and an elephant, you know. If a tiger stays still, the elephant will stomp him to death, but the tiger of injured China will not stay still. It'll, you know, jump out in the night, take a chunk out of the elephant's back, and hunt back off, and eventually the elephant will bleed to death. And that's a very good way to sum up a guerrilla strategy. I mean, there were some attempts at peace, but the French went back to the, you know, the good old-fashioned kill them all and let God sort them out deal. Any hope of peace was pretty much just like out the window at that point. There was no way that the Vietnamese were going to give in after that and actually let the French have anything to do with Vietnam. Until about 1950, so for the first 4 years, it was a pretty local conflict. Like I said, the Chinese Civil War and the Korean War died down. The Communist China became a increasingly large benefactor for the Viet Minh because they were like, well, we have all of these guns left over from these 2 wars we just fought. Now we're not at war, so let's get rid of our old guns and give them to Vietnam so they can overthrow their leaders. And over time to the French, because I think the French, when they began this colonial endeavor, they kind of forgot that they were entirely reliant on other countries for their economy. And as the war drug on, they became very, 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 very reliant on American help. Got a YouTube commenter, Captain Salty 9002 even said, in 1953, President-elect Dwight Eisenhower sent a military study group of 10 senior officers from all branches of the U.S. military. They spent a month in Vietnam studying the French military tactics and the tactical and strategic circumstances. Upon their return to meet with Eisenhower, to a man, they told him not to help the French in their colonial effort. The secret mission has never been officially revealed. My father was one of the 10, a Marine Colonel aviator who flew 10 sorties out of Hanoi in a Grumman F-9F Bearcat over Dien Bien Phu. Damn. That's pretty cool. Just for the record, though, he did not spell Dien Bien Phu correctly. So I feel like that gives him, a bit of credibility. But the French were actually doing so bad during this period. They kept abandoning bases. They couldn't. Like, here we go. Meanwhile, high in the mountains and deep in the jungle, French special forces of the GCMA, Groupement des Commandos Mixtes et Rapportés, led tribesmen who hated communists for their own reasons. Since insertion extractions were dependent upon airstrips, some GCMA men went native because they had no choice. More than a few never returned to civilization. It was just so poorly run. The French would throw small groups of men just so far away from their main bases of operation that the Vietnamese could reliably outnumber them. It was just not a good thing, right? But the U.S., they were helping the French out entirely too much. We didn't give them ground troop assistance. It was just Air Force, and the French became very, 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 very reliant on American air power. Like I said before, guerrilla warfare was the preferred tactic of the Viet Minh. The Tiger reference was apt and slunk into the night after tearing a hole in the elephant's side every time. The French were dropping like flies their bases. They were just abandoning bases because they couldn't hold it. It's like tightly gripping sand, and soon enough there was going to be nothing in the French hands. But the French, they came up with an idea, a wildly efficient idea. They were going to draw the Viet Minh, those guerrilla fighting bastards, into a pitch European-style battle with forts and explosions and machine guns next, and everything a 14-year-old would want in a battle. And hubris got the best of the French, and they decided to hold out in a nearly entirely indefensible position. Dien Bien Phu is at the tippy top of Vietnam, kind of like where the shaft hits the torso, about 60 miles from the Chinese border, the people giving them arms, and a whopping 5 miles from Laos. The people, they used to smuggle arms, and what the French figured they would do is they would block one of the main shipping lanes that they would get weapons from China and Laos, and really cut them off. And they assumed the Vietnamese wouldn't or couldn't or shouldn't use artillery, and if the Chinese gave them any to begin with, they were very wrong on both accounts. The Viet Minh artillery shit on the French, to put it very lightly. They hid the guns very well too, so the French couldn't hit them back even when they had air cover watching and trying to see where the shots were coming from. Vo Nguyen Giap was the head of the Viet Minh army. He was the head general in charge. I can't really remember if he was the general in charge, like the ultimate general in charge at this point, but I'm pretty sure he was. I'm pretty sure he was charged with the whole Viet Minh military, and what he had to do was pull artillery guns up mountains. Like, literally pull them up on top of mountains, right? And when the battle began in March of 45, they unleashed a devastating barrage that shocked the French, who had really... It was an understatement when I said they underestimated the Viet Minh's capabilities. Over the next 2 months, they assaulted relentlessly, combining infantry attacks with artillery fire and slowly constricting the French perimeter. His Giap's leadership and strategic acumen turned what the French had envisioned as a decisive battle in their favor into a unbelievable victory for Vietnamese independence. forcing the French garrison to surrender on May 7, 1944. They effectively ended French colonial rule in Vietnam. Like, the French held out for 56 days or something, but I mean, so how you have to imagine Dien Bien Phu is if you put your hand like you're holding a ball straight up and you touch the middle of your palm, that's Dien Bien Phu, right? And on top of your fingers are all guns shooting down. It's like fish in a barrel. And you know, as men closed through the maze of trenches on the perimeter, and they overtook the French positions one after another. The enemy closed in as little as 10 meters from the front line before the final assault was commenced, and everyone was dying, sometimes holding the last man. There's a quote from an OSS officer, and he was there listening on the radio at like the main French base, not at Dien Bien Phu, but he was listening to the general. I think it was de Gaulle who was there. No, not de Gaulle, the other guy, I don't know. But the guy Dien Phu, or Dien Bien Phu, he was by the name of Jacques Cassis. And here's a quote pertaining the end of that battle. The radio communications were growing fainter. You could hear the noise of communist guns. You could even hear the screaming of the wounded over radio communication. Until finally we heard the voice of Castries say, "My general, they are coming now. All is over. I must cut off." We heard no more from Dien Bien Phu. It was the end of the French adventure in Indochina. It was indeed the end of the French Empire. And, you know, Dien Bien Phu wasn't the last battle, but it was the last battle, if you know what I mean. There were some half-assed attempts by the French to reassert control, but everybody knew it was pointless and a waste of time. And then, you know, the French, they realized they learned their lesson. You know, they learned a thing or two. Because, you know, they were like, you know what, this colonial thing might not work out in our best interest in the long run. Something might happen, you know? No, I'm just kidding. They went to go clamp down on Algeria and killed 25,000 people to do it. So where are we? What's happening now? All right, it's 1954. The French are like, I'm getting out of here. There's people in Vietnam who are like, we don't want to be communist. And they're like, that's reasonable, you know? But there are people who want to be communists. Your George Washington's a communist. What do we do about that? And they go, split us at the 17th parallel. The Vietnamese didn't say that. It was actually the French and Americans who said that. But, I mean, you know, somebody agreed on it, I guess. But the split was not pretty at all. Over 1 million Vietnamese fled south, notably a lot of landlords and Catholics, because nobody likes those landlords and Catholics. I got a little example for you here. Win Tai Chin, she lost her brother to the revolution, and you know, she didn't hear from him for a while because he and his friends went as volunteers in 1954, the night before they were actually supposed to leave south, right before the split, while they still had time. He ended up being in prison, and then after he got out of jail, his only option was to sell his blood and become a street porter. His father, who had gone looking for him, fared far worse. He was unable to get a job after he was in prison or gain a ration card. So he was a beggar, and then one day he went to go see an old friend of his, be like, hey man, I'm starving on the street, can you help me out? And they were like, yeah, come in for dinner. And then they made him leave because it was so dangerous to have him in there. And all they would do would leave like a bag of rice out every morning for him. And one day he just quit doing that, so he died. Yeah, that's really sad. But yeah, Chin didn't know the fate of her father for about a decade, and she didn't know about her brother for about 4 years. So these were just pretty commonplace stories for refugees. Chin does get a redemption arc, though. So we get to take joy in that. What are we doing, guys? What's happening in Vietnam, though? You know, you're like, what's happening here? So Bao Dai was in charge until the U.S.-backed coup replaced him with No Dinh Diem in 1955. No Dinh Diem was not awesome. He was the prime minister, not the emperor, and he almost got fired 6 months before the referendum coup, whatever the hell you want to call it. It doesn't matter if it was a coup or a referendum because it was just not good either way. It's either a coup with referendum-like characteristics or a referendum with coup-like characteristics. Because, Diem won a whopping 98.2% of the vote. But, for the record, voter fraud is a myth perpetuated by Donald Trump. So it was a free and fair election. Because Donald Trump didn't go to Vietnam because he was a draft dodger. But maybe if he had gone to Vietnam, he would have taught them how to rig votes, because that's something Donald Trump invented, which he did in 2016, but could never have happened in 2020 because only he could do it. It's a free and fair election, all right? Free and fair! The Geneva Accords in 1954 ended the First Indochina War and temporarily divided Vietnam at the 17th parallel of North and South Vietnam. These accords aimed to create a framework for peace and set plans for a democratic process to determine Vietnam's political future. What they really wanted to do with the elections is they wanted to reunify Vietnam under a single government through free and fair elections. Thank God Donald Trump wasn't there, or else they could not have those. And elections were scheduled to take place in July 1956, 2 years after the Geneva Accords terms, to allow the time for political stabilization, but that was never going to happen, right? North and South Vietnam were going to participate. The elections were to be supervised internationally to ensure fairness and transparency, and the decision aimed to reflect the will of the Vietnamese people. Elections were seen as crucial for determining the political landscape of Vietnam and potentially ending the division between North and South. Ho Chi Minh and his government in the North were confident of victory due to their significant popular support. No Dinh Diem, however, the president of South Vietnam, refused to participate in the elections. Diem, supported by the United States, argued that free elections were impossible under the communist regime in the North and feared a communist victory. Now, let's be real here, he was also going to defraud the election, so it would have just been bad either way. I really don't blame him. They should have done the Korea thing, but that's, again, 2020 hindsight. The United States viewed the elections through the lens of the Cold War domino theory. I mean, this whole thing is predicated off of domino theory. Have I even gotten to fucking domino theory? I haven't gotten to domino theory yet. I'm going to talk about domino theory in a little bit. But, yeah, and basically, I'll go into more detail later, but domino theory is fearing that a communist victory in Vietnam would lead to a spread of communism throughout Southeast Asia and then the rest of the world, and we did not want that. Growing Cold War tensions admittedly did contribute to the decision to avoid the elections. The elections were never held, leading to continual political and military divide between North and South, and this failure also contributed to escalating tensions, also setting the stage for the Vietnam War. The inability to hold the 56 elections entrenched the division and conflict, and it marked a significant turning point in the history of Vietnamese struggle for unification and independence. Oh my God. Alright. It's finally time. It's finally fucking time. Guys, we made it. We actually made it to America's involvement, our actual involvement, because up until that election failed, it was on the French's fucking head. Alright, I had a cookie and I kind of realized. I looked at the time. I think it's time for me to wrap up on this one because I'm going to be going off for another 40 minutes if I have to get in the beginning of No Din Diem and his family jewels. Good God. So yeah, this has been episode 2. We got through the French occupation of Vietnam and when they got their rat bastard assholes kicked out of there. Talked about Ho Chi Minh's early life. We talked about Dien Bien Phu and all the inconsequential shit that happened in between the beginning of the war for Vietnamese independence and the end of it. Because, I mean, really, it's just a bunch of guerrilla attacks and the French losing. That's it. And Americans coming to the rescue. So, yeah, thanks for listening to this one. I know that these ones are rough, but I appreciate you bearing with me. This has been hysterically accurate. Forgot to say that in the beginning of the podcast, but don't forget to follow and leave a rating and review on Spotify, which is the only place I'm at right now because I'm lazy. You guys have a good week. That's all. That's good goodbye.